This morning we are in the second week of a series of sermons on core values, and today I want to talk for a few minutes about how we judge others, because we all do it, how we judge others, and the power of the words and the thoughts and the feelings that we have, the power that those things have. Words have power, don't they? Brett was kind of talking about it when he was saying, proclaim it and preach it, and what did he say? Protest it. I'm not sure I completely understood what protest it means, but as we sing, that has power. It has the things that we say and the way that we say it have power to transform us and transform the people around us and transform our situations. And I don't mean it in kind of a magical way. I mean it in just, we have the ability to build people up or to tear people down. We have the ability to encourage or discourage. We have the ability to say things and again, kind of create reality, not in a magical way, but in a way that our words have meaning and they have power and they affect people and they affect ourselves as well. They have creative power. Unfortunately, many people, whether intentionally or not, use their words to destroy. Gossip, slander, backbiting. It's amazing how people don't think twice about spreading rumors, repeating falsehoods that they sometimes know are false, half-truths, talk behind each other's backs, negative, critical, judgmental. And the truth of the matter is, if we're honest, sometimes they is us, right? Because we do that. And what we often don't seem to realize is that when we say hurtful things about other people, we're not only hurting them, we are hurting them, but we're also hurting ourselves. We think that we're doing damage only to the person we're talking about, but in actuality, we're doing damage to ourselves as well. And I think Scripture teaches that. I think Jesus teaches this. And so if you have a Bible, I want you to open to the book of Matthew, chapter 7. Matthew chapter 7. This is on page 788 in the church Bibles, or maybe it's 786. It's hard for me to tell. 788 in the church Bibles, Matthew chapter 7. This is part of Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount. And most of the core values that I talked about last week and that I'm talking about over the next few weeks, most of them come from the Sermon on the Mount. There's evidence that Jesus might have preached this sermon numerous times, and maybe it was kind of his stump speech. Maybe every time he went into a town, it says he went and he talked to people, and maybe talked in the synagogue or outside the synagogue when he wasn't welcome there. And there's some evidence that maybe he gave this sermon multiple times over and over and over again. And so if that's true, one of the things we could take from that is that surely if there was one sermon that he liked to preach on every occasion, then it must have contained some of the things that he thought were most important. And I think that's true of the Sermon on the Mount. And I think it's true of the section we're going to look at today. And in chapter 7, Jesus says something I think is often misunderstood. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But chapter 7, verse 1. He says, "Do not judge." Why? "Or you too will be judged." So we think we're saying something bad about them and hurting only them, and we are hurting them, but we're also hurting ourselves. If you judge, you're going to be judged. It gets worse with verse 2. "For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged." So not only if you judge, you're going to be judged, but you're going to be judged in the same way that you judge others. "The measure you use, it will be measured to us." So in other words, if you're always harsh and you always assume the worst about people, I don't think this means God is going to do it, but I think other people will then be harsh and judgmental towards you. If you're constantly critical, other people are going to be constantly critical towards you. If you're constantly, difficult with others, they're going to be difficult with you. I just think it's kind of the way the world works. It's certainly true in my life. I've been the victim of this, and so have you, but I'll share a little bit out of it. So if you know me, if you know me very well, one of the things you know about me is that, there are two kinds of sort of ways that people are organized. There are people that like everything to be clean, and there are people that want everything to have things in their place, and they're not always the same. I'm the kind of person, I don't really care if it's clean, but I want everything to be orderly and have its place. You know what I'm talking about? Like, everything has its spot. That's sort of my personality. Not everybody has the spiritual gift. When I take something out, I'm pretty good about putting it back in the same place. Why? Because when I come back and need it again, I want to be able to find it, right? Some of you can relate to this. For example, when I come in the house, how many of you have a place where you keep your keys? And you keep them in the same place all the time. They're either in your pocket or they're in that place, right? Amen. Some people have the same spiritual gift I have. Keys have their place. They go in your pocket, they're with you, or they're on my dresser. They're never on the kitchen table. They're never in the drawer. They're never, by the sink next to the washing machine. They're never under the refrigerator. They're never found in the laundry. I've never once found my keys left in the door that I opened, right? This is just the way it is. Well, again, not everybody has the same spiritual gift. Would you believe that there are some people who don't have a place where they put their keys every time they come in the house? These people will come in, and sometimes they go on the kitchen table, and sometimes they're on the countertop in the living room, and sometimes they're by the refrigerator, and sometimes they're on the TV. I found them once in the car. Some people will come in the house, and instead of taking them out of their pants, they will leave them in their pants, and then you find them like 4 days later in the laundry. It happens. And this used to drive me nuts, as some of it apparently drives you nuts. I found a solution. I went to the hardware store and I made tons of copies of keys, because here's what used to happen. We used to share some keys, right? The keys on the mantle were the shared keys, and you're supposed to use them, and then you put them back on the mantle. And so when I would go out, and I was going to go out for a run, I get dressed, I'm all ready, and I go and I look for the keys, and they're not there. And I think, if I had used them last, they would be there. But they're not there. So then I have to think, where would I leave them if I didn't have a consistent place to leave them? And you have to search all over the house, right? You search in the laundry room, you search by the TV. By the time you're done searching, you don't even have to go for a run anymore because you're exhausted. Right? So I came up with a solution. We didn't share keys anymore. I got everybody their own keys. And in fact, I had a whole stack of backup keys made because it's not that expensive. And people kept losing their keys, right? And so here's where this story gets into judgment. So the thing is when you have this particular spiritual gift, it's easy to get judgy on other people when they lose their keys. And I would have family members constantly coming to me, Dad, where are the spare keys? Because I can't find my keys. And I'd be like, if you had just put it where you were supposed to put it, it wouldn't be a problem, right? It's easy to get judgy on people like that, right? You know what the shame of it is? And this is the God's honest truth. There came a day when I lost my keys. And would you believe I didn't get any sympathy from anybody? Because the same measure that I had been using was measured against me, right? If you judge, you too will be judged. It's just, Jesus is stating just kind of the way it works, right? It's fun being judgy until you're being judged. So he says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. In the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. The other thing about this is I know an awful lot of people that like to read this verse and stop after the first 3 words, and they don't read any further. Do not judge, right? That's anytime anybody misbehaves, the first thing out of their mouth is, don't judge me. Don't judge. Jesus said, don't judge. You can't say a word about what I'm about to do because it would be violating the commands of Jesus. Even though I'm about to violate 10 of them, that's the one I don't want you to violate, right? Everybody, that's like a cultural, that's the one thing in Christianity that everybody in America loves. Don't judge, You know, it's more popular than God so loved the world. Don't judge. Don't judge. I remember once I was standing outside of a hospital waiting on somebody, and there's an old man standing there, and he's in a hospital gown, and he's got the IV hanging out of his arm with the little IV roller thing that you get when you're mobile with your IV, and he's got oxygen. He's got one of the oxygen tubes in his nose, and he's standing there with a cigarette. And I watched someone who turned out to be his son walking up to him, and the old man points his hand with the cigarette and it says, "Don't judge me," to his son, right? We use this verse of Jesus as an excuse to say, hey, don't ever say anything to me about anything because Jesus said it and you can't do it. I had a friend of mine once confess to me that she had cheated on a test in seminary. And she prefaced the story with, "Don't judge me, but." Right? I'm not sure that Jesus' intent in saying this was to try to create a command that gave us license to do anything we wanted to do anywhere at any time. I don't think he's saying ignore everyone around you, be only about you and you alone, and ignore what everything else is going on. I think he's more interested in, I'm not sure it's so much about judging or not judging as it is in how we judge. And this is where the rest of the story, the rest of the verse comes in. So he says in verse 1, "Don't judge or you too will be judged." Verse 2 is, "In the same way you judge others, you will be judged. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you." So that gives some explanation that maybe creates a little more room in the don't judge category. You got to go past the first three words. But then the next few verses really add a lot. He says this, verse 3, he says, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank," or the older translations say log, "in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there's a plank in your own eye?" He says, "You hypocrite." But then listen to this, because this is the part we often miss. He says, "You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." So he starts off by saying, don't judge, but then later, as he kind of explains it, he says, actually, and he doesn't use the word judge, but he says, he kind of implies there may be times when you do have to help somebody else. There may be times when you do have to say something. There may be times when you do have to remove that speck of sawdust from somebody else's eyes, but do it wisely. Do it carefully. Like, take the mess out of yourself before you get, so that you can see clearly. I think what he's saying is not so much don't judge as judge well, judge carefully, judge mercifully, judge with compassion and with empathy. I think if you were to take just a few things out of these verses, I think first, judge with sympathy, judge with compassion, because the measure you use is going to be the one used against you. Second, judge with care, because it's easy to mess up judgment. It's easy to assume the wrong things, think you know everything. Do something, say something, assume something that's going to hurt someone. Instead, realize that you've got a plank in your eye, you've got a log in your eye. So be careful, don't jump to conclusions. Ask questions, be humble, remove that log from your own eye before you seek to help. And the key is you're seeking to help the other person. Check your motive. And finally, and I think this kind of sums it up, but finally, because we all judge, there's no way not to judge. The nicer word is discern. If you want to put it in terms of like something we would value, be discerning, discern. Discern with grace and discern with mercy. Discern or judge to build others up, not to tear them down. How much better, more productive is it in our own lives when we hear someone say, "You're doing great, keep going," versus, "What were you thinking?" You know, there's judgment in "you're doing great, keep going, you're going to make it." There's judgment in that, isn't it? It's just that it's a judgment that's encouraging instead of tearing down. "What are you, an idiot? You didn't think of this?" A word of encouragement goes a long, long way. What if one of our core values was to judge with encouragement rather than judging with criticism? What if most of us were encouragers rather than discouragers? What if Christians were known as people who were quick to take the log out of their own eye and slow and careful about taking the sawdust out of somebody else's eyes? What if? I don't think Jesus died so that we could condemn each other. I don't think Jesus died so that we could tear each other down, put each other in their place, and speak badly about each other, gossip, backbite, and those kinds of things. I don't think that's why he died. He died so that we could be free from that kind of stuff in our families, at work, in our neighborhoods, in our churches. Perhaps you're here today and you struggled with self-esteem because you've let the words of someone who was judgmental kind of get into your heart. Or maybe, for many of us, actually, it's not the words of someone else, it's those voices in our own heads, right? We're our own worst critic. If that's you and your self-esteem is low and your self-worth is low this morning because of the judgment of somebody else, what I would encourage you to do is pray to God and ask God to help you get those voices out of your head that are tearing you down. Ask God to help those words from someone who's judgmental, who's putting you down and tearing you down. Ask those words to go in one ear and right out the other. Just ask God for the mercy to be free of that kind of bondage. I promise you, if you seek God in this, God will begin to set you free. You're probably doing better than you think. And once you get those voices out of your head, and once you let those voices go in one ear and out the other, you're going to start to realize that you're doing better than you think you are. So that's for some of us. There are others of us who are here, and maybe we're all in both camps, but the other camp is those of us that struggle with being judgy sometimes. Maybe the struggle is to avoid being the judgmental one. We need to ask God to change our attitudes, to help us to see those around us through His eyes and to assume the best. And I had an example of this just on Friday. I was playing golf with a friend of mine. And there was in golf, one of the challenges, it's not just the game that's the challenge, it's also the people around you that are playing. And there was a group ahead of us that was just going so slow. And we were complaining, they're so slow. This is going to take 5 hours, blah, 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 blah. We were, we weren't hurting them. We were hurting ourselves. And then about midway through the round, I saw something that completely changed my view of the group ahead of us. Elderly man limps off the green. He's got a bandage on his knee. He's just limping off the green. And all of a sudden, I didn't see them as that slow group that's driving me crazy. I saw that guy as the courageous guy who came out and walked the golf course despite having a hurt knee. So much of how we view others is how we allow ourselves to frame what they're doing. Ask God, if you struggle with this, ask God to help you to see the best in people, not the worst. Ask God to help you frame what they're doing, what they're saying, who they are, and that with mercy and grace. And what you'll find is that will transform your attitude toward them, and it'll be so much easier not to look down on people. It'll be so much easier not to criticize them. It'll be so much easier to cheer them on. So when we got up to a place where I could actually speak to that guy, I said, "Man, you're an inspiration. I'm so glad you're out here playing golf." 10 minutes earlier, I would have said, "Man, can you speed it up? I'm hungry. I want to finish." It's all in how we frame it. Jesus died to set us free. He died to set us free from sin and death, but he also died to set us free from things like shame and guilt, from insecurity, and from the judgment that people pass on us, and from the need to be judgmental towards others. Jesus died to set us free. Will you join with me in prayer?